South Korea and Japan have agreed to embark on a new chapter to end long-standing bitter bilateral ties, with the two leaders putting their heads together in Tokyo last week. On today's On Point, we look back at the Yoon-Kishida summit with Dr. Stephen Noerper, president of Hawaii-based Asia Dialogue. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Good morning. The Yoon-Kishida summit followed Seoul's compensation plan for Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor, which would be paid for using donations from domestic companies. Now, that looks like a good deal for Japan. So then, what has South Korea earned through the summit?
Well, what South Korea has done is earn a lot in terms of initiating the process. We've yet to see a response from Japanese business, but they could put forward a significant sum to help meet South Korean concerns, which are real. But also, it's one of a much larger menu of issues. And so this helps move the agenda along in terms of the common interest of South Korea and Japan, in terms of the economic benefits of better cooperation. And that's in Korea's national interest. And so it should well serve it going forward.
Right. The compensation issue may seem to be resolved at the moment, but there are still a lot of issues on the table that need to be taken care of, namely the release of the contaminated Fukushima water and also Tokyo's persistent claims over South Korea's Dokdo Islands. Now, how are these issues going to be taken care of? What do you think?
Well, it's a great question because issues like Fukushima raise a lot of concern, and clearly those are well stated by Korea. But there's a bigger issue at foot, which is that we need to prevent future Fukushimas. So to avoid that in terms of breaches on nuclear safety. So that should be a concern when we're talking about North Korea and its nuclear development, as well as the civilian nuclear sectors across Northeast Asia. So one thing is that will be debated, and you can use the imprimatur of the United Nations. You could use regional fora to discuss the environmental significance of that. In terms of Dokdo, South Korea very early on won the case of international public opinion. Japan's tacitly admitted that, despite the stated dispute. And the fact of the matter is Japan is more concerned about the Senkakus, about the East China Sea and security there than they are about Dokdo. And Dokdo may in some ways provide them a model. But economic cooperation, environmental cooperation around Dokdo may be a way forward. And on this week, when we mark the 10th anniversary of the Tohoku area emergency, the earthquake, the tsunami, and the Fukushima disaster, remember that it was South Korean disaster assistance that was the first foreign aid made available to Japan. That's an important lesson, an important contribution to fall back on when we talk about Korea-Japan relations.
Right. And also, following the summit, a number of reports now mention the high possibility that President Yoon Suk Yeol will be invited to the G7 summit in May. Now, if he does go, how significant would that be? I mean, what would Yoon's attendance mean?
It would mean a great deal. Remember that South Korea represents a lot in terms of leadership in the region, increasingly so. It is a bulwark for democracy at a time when democracy is under challenge. And to be there at the G7 shows an expanded regional and global role for South Korea. And all of the issues on the table, financial, economic, political, security, environmental. So that puts South Korea in a very good position. It places them among the leading countries in the world, and it's an important discourse that takes place. It also stands in very sharp opposition to concerns about Russia, which used to participate in what we call the G8 process. But it shows a very stark contrast, and it shows a South Korea with a diplomatic muscle and a political legitimacy that's important for guiding its forward. And again, the bottom line is South Korea national interest, and this does a great deal.
Right, right. And also, before we let you go, Dr. Noerper, with top-level diplomacy between the two countries now restored according to the presidential office, what steps will the two countries take now?
Well, your report just mentioned one, which is the exchange of lawmakers, and that was invited on a bipartisan basis because good relations is a bipartisan issue. There'll be certainly the opportunity for more senior level visits back and forth. We need to see a lifting of those export controls. Semiconductors has been mentioned, but clearly the diversification of the supply chain and the guarantee of semiconductor production, that again is in South Korea's interest. And of course, Japan was the #1 employer of South Korean graduates outside the country before the latest difficulties. So we need to get back to economic exchange, university exchange, people-to-people exchange. The amount of interest in South Korean culture is tremendous in Japan, and the cultural sharing between the two has real promise. That makes a natural economic territory also one where cultures are united, where democratic values are united, and where concerns about national security of both nations toward China, toward the DPRK, especially with missile and nuclear development, stands at the ready and provides a safer peninsula and a safer Japan and a safer South Korea.
Right. Maybe it really is in the hands of South Korea to pursue national interests and also achieve those national interests.
Indeed.
All right. Dr. Noerper, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you. Aloha.